Hello and welcome to Decoding SuperBrains with Kumaar Bagrodia. We have with us Mr. Vinton Cerf, who's the Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. He's widely known as one of the fathers of the Internet. He's the co-designer of the TCP/IP protocols and the architecture of the Internet. He contributes widely to global policy development and the continued spread of the Internet. He's won numerous awards, including the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, the US National Medal of Technology, the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering, the Prince of Asturias Award, the Tunisian National Medal of Science, the Japan Prize. It goes on and on. And I met him a few months ago in person, and I became a super fan of this super brain. So, Vint, welcome to Decoding SuperBrains, and great to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me join you. I must assert that I don't think I have a super brain. I've just been very lucky with the problems I've been confronted with and the people who have helped solve them. So luck plays a certain role in all of this.
Well, you've just enlightened us with humility in that instance.
Well, that's reality. I mean, you can fool yourself if you want to, and a number of people do. I remember a period of time during what was called the dot boom, from the mid 1990s to early 2000. There were the internet became very visible to the public. The World Wide Web became very visible. Everyone was excited, and the venture capital guys were throwing cash at anybody who was starting a business that looked like it had something to do with the internet. And then around April of 2000, everything came apart. It all crashed, and a lot of those startups disappeared. And some of the CEOs were wondering what happened. They thought they were so brilliant. All this capital was flowing in. It must be because they were super smart. And the real answer was no, actually, A, they didn't have a business model that made any sense. And B, they didn't know the difference between capital and revenue. I mean, revenue is supposed to keep going, capital you run out of. And so when they all ran out, they kind of wondered what happened. So from my point of view, you should be realistic about what makes things work and why you're successful. Give credit where it's due. I certainly believe in that.
Vint, what are some of the key brain attributes and your mental states or habits that you think really define you and are responsible for where you are today? What are your major strengths at a very neuroscientific level?
Well, of course, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I have no idea whether my analysis is worthy of the name. But one thing I will say is that I've always had a very strong curiosity bump. I've always been curious about things. Why does this behave this way? How does this thing work? I think, although my title is computer scientist, I'm really more of an engineer because I like to build things. I like to make things work. I like to make things work for other people in useful ways. That's very satisfying for me. So curiosity over a very broad range of subjects, I think, is very indicative of what drives me. I may not always understand because sometimes the topics require a lot of background. So I have this cartoon model of physics, which wouldn't satisfy any reasonable test if you wanted to give it. But it leaves me with a feeling of sort of understanding things, and sometimes that has to be sufficient.
You've had a hearing impairment for a very long time, and how have you overcome that sort of impediment?
Well, it's not anything that I've done personally. I've been benefited by hearing aids, which I've been wearing since I was 13, and I'm almost 77 now. So you can imagine I've been wearing them for a long time in both ears. I was born 6 weeks prematurely, and they put me in an oxygen tent. This was in 1943. They didn't know what else to do. So we ended up thinking, anyway, that part of my hearing impairment was caused by exposure to oxygen at a very early age. So I get about a 1 dB loss every year, but the hearing aids keep getting better. at the same time. So I managed to survive in a hearing world without having to learn to sign, without having to lip read. So I've been very, very fortunate that technology has solved the problem. There are a lot of people for whom hearing aid technology wouldn't work. My wife is a good example. She had normal hearing until she was 3 years old, and then she had spinal meningitis, which destroyed her hearing completely. So she was profoundly deaf from age 3, and until she was 53, she had to lip read in order to understand people. She didn't learn to sign. So she went all through college, raised 2 sons without being able to hear. And then in 1996, she got 2 cochlear implants. Well, actually, it's not quite. She got 1 cochlear implant in 96, which worked spectacularly well, and then another one in 2006, which gave her binaural hearing. I have to tell you that technology is clearly life-changing, utterly dramatic. And for her, of course, re-entering into the hearing world has really changed her life. And so technology can make a huge difference for people. It certainly has for me.
As a high achiever, I mean, you've done so much in life already, and I'm sure there's a lot more coming. How do you deal with the pressure of delivering excellence? Performance anxiety, if you can call it.
Well, I don't necessarily have a lot of performance anxiety, and part of the reason for that is that I rely on really smart people to get things done. And even the internet, although Bob Kahn and I did the early designs of the internet in the early 1970s, but we had learned from our colleagues who worked on the ARPANET, predecessor to the internet, about layered architectures and various other choices for protocol design. And since then, all of my other work has been very dependent on the energy and creativity of other people. I'm a very enthusiastic guy. I'm excited about making something happen. And if I can infect other people with that same degree of enthusiasm, especially smart people, it's amazing how much you can get done. And so from my point of view, oddly, even though I think of myself as an engineer, I'm also kind of a salesman, because if I can get other people to want to do what I want to do, you can get a lot done. And so I think the real answer here is that being smart means finding other people who are smarter than you are and convincing them that they want to do what you need to
do. I think that's great, because most of the times we sort of start getting worried as if the weight of the entire world is on our shoulders alone, and we forget about the team. We forget about the fact that so many other people are directly or indirectly invested in our success.
Well, I have this funny feeling that that some people that I've worked with or who have theoretically worked for me don't want to disappoint me, and so they really work very hard to make sure things happen as planned. And so I've benefited in a sense from that. But mostly, I think that if you're pragmatic about things and you just confront reality and you confront real problems, you can often, solve them either by going straight through them or finding a way around them or tunneling underneath. So from my point of view, reality is important, pragmatism is important, but so is enthusiasm.
So Vint, the process of technological creation obviously tends to be a lot of trial and error, and you will have many failures or many disappointments along the way. What has been your mantra to sort of deal with that?
Well, I've been very lucky. I haven't had too many big disappointments, to be honest. And as I say, luck plays a role in that, to say nothing of picking really good colleagues. But that some people get depressed, and I'm often thought about that. And I've decided that if you feel depressed, that means somebody else is winning. And I'm a very competitive guy. And I refuse to get depressed, especially by something somebody else has done or said, because if I allow that to happen, then they win, and I don't want them to win. I want to win. So my view is that this sort of down in the dumps feeling is something I don't tolerate because I'm so competitive.
So it is really that competitive energy which you're able to channelize and not sort of get depressed or feel sad or disappointed.
It's sort of like, if it's a personal thing, of course, then I don't want the other guy to win. If it's more like this problem is not going to defeat us, it's sitting here right in the middle of the road and we have to do something about it. But generally speaking, my view is that, you can solve almost everything. At some point you have to be pragmatic, like doubling the speed of light doesn't necessarily work. Einstein is still demonstrating, Einstein's theories are still being demonstrated and proven by experiments. So if the problem requires doubling the speed of light, maybe we should not try to do that. But short of that kind of problem, I think that we should look at problems as potentially solvable.
Right. And a lot of us who are on the journey of any kind of new innovation or inventions or trying to disrupt industries or business models, people often go through maybe moments of self-doubt because these are uncharted territories, absolutely new ideas or new technologies. Have you faced that at any point in time or within your team, and how have you managed that?
Well, I remember one particularly painful incident. I was working at a company called MCI in the early 1980s. I was hired to build what eventually became known as MCI Mail, which is a commercial electronic mail service. And we spent about 9 months. It was a tremendous experience. There was a group of people, multiple vendors. We met every month and went through our progress reports. It was a very successful enterprise in terms of implementation. And then the day came when we were going to announce it. And so the night before, we went through everything and made sure everything worked. And somewhere very late in the evening, suddenly one part of the system stopped working. And we had a $25 million announcement, public relations things, satellite communications. We were going to do real-time examples and everything else. And so I'm sitting here thinking, well, so much for my first big job in the private sector. I'm about to, go down with the ship. So I probed into the problem and discovered that a particular part of it that wasn't working was a problem for one of the vendors who was a contractor working on the project. So of course it's late at night and I just picked up the phone and called and hollered at the guy, and it turned out he was on his honeymoon. He was in Las Vegas, and I woke him up. But I said, listen, you got to pull this rabbit out of the hat because we have a lot depending on it. And bless his heart, he actually recompiled the system and got it all working again about, I don't know, maybe a half an hour before showtime. And so I remember thinking right about then, boy, I am very dependent on this other person to get something done. And I lucked out and we got it fixed. I think that was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in terms of project development. Was almost about to go over the cliff.
Wow. Wow. That certainly is not a position anyone wants to find themselves in.
Oh.
You once gave me this quote about you not allowing anything to defeat you. Can you give us an anecdote and how you usually use that in your daily life?
Well, as I had mentioned earlier, that I feel like I'm an engineer, and engineers love problems. They love to solve problems, and that's what engineering is about. And so, unless, as I say, if it requires doubling the speed of light or some other physical anomaly, I see problems as generally solvable, especially if they're engineering problems, whether it's software or hardware or something. I also know when to turn to somebody expertise for help. I mean, often it turns out if you have the right tools, problem solving is easy. If you don't have the right tools or the right knowledge, it's very hard. And so you have to get past the feeling that you should be able to do this all on your own. and be smart enough to go grab smart people who know more than you do to help solve problems. But that's generally how I approach things. If I can't figure this out on my own, then I'm going to go find somebody who can help me do that. And I know that in the course of doing design and development of new systems, working with somebody or with a team is very attractive because done the right way, it's mutually reinforcing. You know, you understand that everybody wants to get this problem solved. You have different views. You may have knockdown, drag out arguments about how to solve something, but it's not personal. It's more like you understand that everybody wants to solve the problem and is willing to work very hard and, you know, has strong feelings about it. For me, well, the interplanetary internet work was very much like that. We have half a dozen people who were working on that. We had a lot of arguments over what the protocol should look like, but nobody took anything personally. It was all understood that we were arguing in order to find the best possible solution.
And, you know, when you created the architecture for the internet, along with your colleague, and you set up the TCP/IP protocol, what was that time like in terms of the kind of trials and tribulations you would have to go through as a team, as an individual? It was something that had never been done before. And did that kind of weigh down on you differently?
No. This was wonderful stuff. It was unexplored territory, for one thing. Bob Kahn and I worked together, and this is another important point here is, like I say, I like very much working with people. My favorite situation is standing in front of a whiteboard, drawing pictures and having a big argument. So Bob and I worked out the basic architecture, and then I had a team of graduate students at Stanford who worked with me for over a year, or pretty much a year in 1974, to do the detailed specifications of the TCP protocol. And then ARPA sponsored continued work with a number of locations, one in University College London, one at Burnett and Newman in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Stanford University, to actually implement the now specified protocol. So the team got bigger and bigger. The amount of expertise that was available increased. And we discovered, for example, that we had made mistakes in the design. We iterated, we changed the architecture or the protocol specifically several times, 4 times actually, 4 iterations, and eventually splitting the internet protocol off from TCP. And of course, now we have what we have in today's internet. So all of that was a consequence of allowing everyone to participate and to bring their ideas to the table. So the architecture was very open. It allowed new ideas and new protocols to be part of the story. And again, I depended very heavily on smart people overcoming the problems that arose as we worked our way into implementation.
What words of advice would you give to the viewers who are obviously going through a tough time, you know, with the coronavirus and in general, you know, the global economy, you know, markets, etc., have not been, you know, the best in the last, you know, few quarters, recent times, and going forward, things look pretty, you know, tough.
Well, first of all, remember that we have been through other really tough periods of time in the past, and somehow the world has survived. We had the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. We had World War I. We had World War II. We've had other wars. We've had other pandemics. And somehow we've been able to survive. There are casualties, and we all have to understand that. In the current pandemic, it's particularly pernicious because the virus is so rapidly propagated atmospherically. If it were not for that, we would have a lot easier battle to do isolation and to protect people from becoming infected. This is one of the harder cases to deal with. But it will eventually end, either because of herd immunity or because of vaccination capability, or both. There will be casualties, and we should be conscious of that. In fact, if anything, I believe this particular situation we're in now reinforces arguments in favor of universal basic income, for example, and social networks, safety nets, which in the US we have neglected. And the wealth disparity and income disparity is severe. We don't have the kind of social safety networks that we should have. We should learn from other countries that have managed their way through this better than we have. I won't dwell too much on the testing point, but it's very important. We should be doing more of it. So I am optimistic that we will manage to get through this. I don't think this is the end of humanity. But I think that there are very important lessons to take away from this experience, and we should apply ahead of time so that the next pandemic that comes along, or the next major challenge that comes along, existential challenge that comes along, we will be better prepared because we will have learned from this one.
And what can we take away from your words of wisdom on how people should manage themselves during these times and prepare for the times coming ahead?
Well, I'm speaking from a position of privilege because I have a job at Google which allows me to work from home, and so I do recognize the great privilege that gives me. If I had to offer advice right now, I think it's two things immediately. One of them is hang on to the optimism. This too will pass. And the second one, I think, is don't be shy to ask for help. Hopefully there is help that is available. But some people take great pride in surviving on their own. And at this point, things are tough. And people should feel more comfortable with themselves saying, I need help. And hopefully help can come. And that, of course, is, again, a challenge for all of us in our society, which is to make sure that help can come, that we provided for and planned for and arranged for help to come for people that need it.
Thank you so much, Vint. You've been so candid in your answers, and it's truly a pleasure to be interacting with you again. Every time I meet you or interact with you, I become an even bigger super fan of the super brain that you are.
Well, thank you for that. Just keep in mind that you're really complimenting all the people that have helped me.
Thank you so much, and power to you. And may you keep doing amazing things which will benefit all of us.
Well, thank you for that. I hope I have the privilege of doing that too. Bye for now.